So for 2025, we are very excited to have with us Dr. Madhukar Pai from McGill University. Many of you know him well. He is the Global Chair of Tuberculosis and Global Health, at McGill University. But he does so much more than that, and I think many of us are familiar with his work around power shifting, a topic that's very important to all of us these days. And should be. So I'm not going to speak much longer. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pai to share some of his work with us and really get us thinking about how we can institutionalize this idea of shifting power in our daily work. We don't have time for introductions, so what I'll do is I'll have you present, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. At that time, you can introduce yourself. For those online, please feel free to submit some questions online. We'll share those with Dr. Pai afterwards, but also raise your hand at the end for discussion, during the discussion. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Pai. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nandita. Thank you, colleagues. I hope people online can hear me okay. I'm not too close to the mic, but this is all I can do without a standing mic. Are people okay, Nandita? Are they able to hear?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Firstly, what a horrible week to be talking about power, right? I genuinely, I cannot tell you how distraught I am. Every night I've been watching doom scrolling to see what horrible fresh hell is coming our way. Last 3 days have been really, really hard, and I know it's even harder for folks here at WHO. So we're all in solidarity with you, and I think this is exactly the kind of discussion we should be having. And at a minimum, I hope we can use the Q&A period to rant a little bit and think about what we can do collectively. So a talk like this, I think it should invariably have something about my own positionality. So the first 30 years of my life were spent in a small town called Vellore in South India. And now the 20 plus years of my life I've spent between the United States and Canada. So as much as I see myself as a double agent in global health, I firmly see myself today as a privileged global North academic. And to that extent, I have no confusion in my mind that I'm part of the problem and I'm part of all of the critiques that are coming our way, right? So I don't see myself as someone who's standing apart from the global health industrial complex that every single one of us is part of, right? So everything applies to me. I'm trying to walk the path of allyship with some difficulties and challenges, but I will tell you what my learnings on that allyship path is looking like. So in terms of the conclusion slide, if you wish, I think we all would see, if we haven't at all during the COVID pandemic, that we have an extraordinarily strong track record of repeatedly failing on equity. And my hypothesis, and I would love for you to chip in here, that the structural inequities in our field make it impossible to not fail on equity. I think we are structurally doomed to continue this cycle of inequity unless we reimagine the power structures that we are all part of. And so to bring equity, to even think about equity, we have to start thinking about power and power shift. And this week is a demonstration of power, right? This is a horrible week to speak about power, but it is the power that is naked and visible and in your face that you can't possibly escape, right? And so shifting power, in my opinion, and that's what the Lancet piece also talks about, we believe requires two forces to be simultaneously active. That the global south that truly owns much of the issues that we're talking about has to basically demonstrate leadership, and the rest of us will have to walk the path of allyship. And I think both are possible to give you examples around or discuss examples around. So I can see glimpses of some hope on both sides, but I also see massive problems or obstacles for shifting power. And I think this week is a great illustration of what the obstacles are and could look like.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Can you come here? here because the camera is here, and I
Okay.
think people online want to see you.
Yeah.
So just shift a little
Perfect.
bit.
Can we get rid of this?
Okay.
All right. Now, this is just a very, very quick illustration that every single person in this room knows. From the days of HIV to COVID vaccine equity to Mpox crisis in Africa now, it is a graveyard of inequities in global health. We are all tired of seeing the same stuff unfold every single time there's a crisis. Who is left behind? It's invariably our colleagues in Africa because of the anti-blackness that is inherent in global health, but also all of global south continues to bear the brunt of these inequities. I think this room needs no introduction to the graveyard of inequities that global health is. And so here is a field which on paper explicitly considers itself as solving inequities as our raison d'etre, right? Every single one of us in global health will unhesitatingly admit that we are in this business to solve inequities in health access, healthcare, and yet we come from a direct lineage of colonialism and colonial medicine that continues to echo through global structures that we see all around us today. And so it's a very interesting paradox that a field that cares so much about health inequities is somehow not self-reflexive about inequities within the field itself. And so when I see a tropical medicine conference in Seattle or Toronto this year, I'm asking, what are they thinking? Right? How does this start to make any sense at all? And that lack of reflexivity is something we need to, I think, intentionally bring. And I'll show you lots of examples around what intentionality can actually do good for us when I talk about our journal. So this was something that I developed some years ago. I still believe it is pretty valid and on point. These are the default settings of global health. Barring intentional effort, barring extraordinary hard work, everything in global health defaults to these power structures, namely global north. We are here in Switzerland right now, white, men, and people with lots of power and privilege, the elite, highly privileged people like us, right? I think those of us in this room essentially illustrate this. And yes, I see myself on this slide. Apart from not being white, I meet every one of these criteria, right? I can see my face on this picture. That's why I told you, not for a second do I see myself as stepping away from these structures. I am shaped and molded by these structures. I have benefited from these structures. I've been educated in the global north. I'm a professor in a global north university. I see myself. So you've all seen this. And why do I even come up with this? This is not my opinion. By now, there is a ton of data to demonstrate why this is the case, right from where Global North are headquartered, organizations are HQ'd, who leads Global North organizations, who serves on the board of Global North organizations. Some of you have been involved in this kind of work to document it. It's so in our face. It's inescapable as to who runs global health today. Where do global health dollars go? We've all seen where they go. They pretty much go to organizations and contractors in their own global north countries and universities. Authorship, mountains of publications now on how unequal authorship is. If Rajat was there, I would show him that coloniality report that UNU just published a few months ago. Undeniably, authorship patterns are extraordinarily skewed towards global north authors, first authorship, senior authorship, and parachute science. As much as we think it's an anomaly, it happens every day. I've seen any number of articles, papers about Uganda. There's not a single Ugandan author, even in my own journal. And I'm ashamed of it. I don't know what to do about it, but I'm seeing this happen on a daily basis in global health. Who is editing? By now, again, any number of studies, including the one we did, clearly show that global health journals are not safe spaces for global South authors. That is because structurally, the gatekeepers, i.e. editors, are mostly global North people, and it is very hard for them to even understand what a safe space for global South authors could look like or should look like. Lancet in its 200 years has never had a non-white male editor, right? And they themselves have published this. It's not me saying so. That's a paper that Lancet published. Where are global health degrees offered? These are all master's degrees in global health. You can see it's a very similar looking image. And an average master's in global health in a United States university will cost you upwards of $60,000 only in tuition fees. So then the question is, for who are these global health degrees offered? Who benefits from them? And what is the rationale for having these expensive masters in global health that most people from the global South can't even dream of accessing? And where are conferences held? I think anyone who is from a global South country will tell you stories about how devastating the current situation is for getting visas. That is a real picture from the Montreal AIDS conference that I attended, held in my city, with empty panels of Africans who were denied, right? If you lock out Africans from an AIDS conference, where is the hope for you, right? It's just absolutely mind-boggling. Since that period, Canada has just completely lost it. I consider Canada an unsafe space for global health meetings now. In fact, they've started moving meetings away from Canada to Bali and all sorts of places. United States, deeply problematic, more so starting this week. Europe is a mess. UK, the less said, the better. None of these are safe spaces for global health meetings. So if you host global health meetings, and if the chief of Africa CDC is struggling to get into the country, what hope do we have, right? And this is the deeply problematic issue we deal with. And every year around World Health Assembly, so many people write to me as if magically I can help them, but they can't get into Switzerland, right? So we know what the realities here are. And this cartoon by an Indian cartoonist is like a gut punch, right? I mean, the guy has just beautifully summarized 500 op-eds that we have written about this extraordinarily unequal field that global health is in terms of visa, right? Those of us who have passport privilege can get on a plane tonight if we want to, pretty much land wherever we want. That is not the case for people. I remember when I had my Indian passport, how many months and years of my life have gone into just filling out visa paperwork and waiting for somebody at the embassy to give me the opportunity, right? It's devastating, and my first US visa appointment ended in 30 seconds. 30 seconds is all it took for my first US visa appointment to be rejected. And that kind of has made me aware of how extraordinary our field is. So, having seen the problems, the question is there any hope for us? Is there anything at all we can do within this highly unequal field called global health and development to even bring some equity, right? And like I said, this piece was our thought piece, not only to say what might be possible, we actually wanted to give some hopeful examples of people and organizations that are slowly starting to think about it and bring some structural changes within the organization. You can see we intentionally avoided using the word decolonizing global health in this piece, precisely because not only is it that term now so completely abused that much of the time we are not even close to even talking about decolonizing. We are not touching any of the underlying structures. We're making some changes. Getting a visa for someone shouldn't be called decolonizing, for Christ's sakes. It should just be simple, basic stuff that you do and do in a normal manner rather than call it something exotic when it's not, right? So we don't use that term in this context. So the first piece in this was clearly what does leadership from the global South look like, right? And I can see any number of articulations of this leadership that Global South, essentially, Global South can and should and is increasingly taking the space that rightfully belongs to them. So when Africa CDC says, we're going to manufacture our own vaccines on the region, that is exactly the point they're making. We're sick and tired of charity, which may or may not come. We're going to do stuff ourselves, right? And backing that vision then automatically becomes a responsibility for the rest of us, because that to me is allyship, right? So there's any number of things that Global South governments, Global South funders, Global South academic institutions, international organizations, global health journals. Where are the Global South journals, right? And why are we not publishing in good quality Global South journals? What about the Global South conferences? I can see the CPHIA and this whole wave of new conferences. It gives me so much happiness when I see these Global South conferences. Some of the best meetings I'm attending these days are Global South-based events. Right? That's where we should all be going to. If we really want to learn malaria, go to a malaria meeting in Africa. Right? That is where you really learn. And in tuberculosis, I cannot tell you how exciting it is for us when we have conferences in the Global South where there's a high TB burden country we're going to. Now, I want to spend more time on this. What does that mean for the rest of us? So with the leadership that the Global South is showing, one of the questions that I get asked all the time, especially in Global North settings, is, are you saying there's no role for us in global health? That is not what I'm saying. I'm not asking that we check out of global health. I'm saying we be very thoughtful in what our role is. And the only possible role that I am landing in my own head and in my own practice is one of allyship. That is, if invited, we play a role and stand in solidarity with people who are going to solve their own problems, right? So as Africa solves its NTD problem, if invited, can I go and be there with solidarity and support them in executing whatever they have envisioned to solve the NTD crisis in Africa? That would be what that allyship would look like. Now, we've given lots of, again, we've broken it down by what Global North governments can do, Global North funders can do, Global North academic institutions like mine, the Harvards, the McGills, the Oxford. What is our place? The London schools, what are we supposed to be doing in global health? The international organizations, the CHAIs, the PATS, and the FINES, and all these organizations, what are they doing? What does their role in global health look like? Global health journals like mine, what is our role? It is a Global North organization, our journal. What is our role? And then what are conference organizations like International AIDS Society or the TB Union? What are we supposed to be doing? And so we've given concrete suggestions on every one of them. And I'll just start off with this. Allyship by Global North governments, for example, would be supporting the pandemic accord that WHO has been working on for several years now with enormous challenge, with strong equity and accountability built into it. Visa policies that will allow greater Global South representation in jobs and conferences and meetings, whatever. Contribute to the loss and damage fund, which has already been established because Global South is going to bear the brunt of climate crisis, which Global North created in the first place. So contributing reparations, if you will. Debt relief for low-income countries right now. They're drowning in debt. And policies that promote, not oppose DEI. Now, even when I read this and I see what has been unleashed this week, this is the opposite of allyship. Nothing on the previous slide is appearing right now from the White House, right? So we wrote our piece like several months ago. When I see what has happened in the world right around, this is the reality of what I would call complete failure of allyship, right? And it's not just a United States issue. Canada is turning red, right? We are fully expecting to go down this path in this year when we have our elections. And many, many global North countries are turning far right, where all of these things that we care about are simply not even on the table. They can't even be discussed right now. In fact, you could go to jail if you spoke about DEI and anti-racism right now. And I know Ngozi is co-chairing a Lancet commission on racism in global health. This is how far the reality is from where we need to be. So I don't know what to tell you, because I myself, I'm at a loss to understand how we go and argue for some basic things that we care about in this current political environment that we are a part of. I genuinely think one of the strongest allyship work global North countries could have done was to just share the damn vaccines in a timely manner. I know many of us in this room advocated relentlessly for it. Did not happen. We ended up hoarding vaccines that we trashed by the millions. We did not back the pandemic accord because we were more worried about protecting big pharma profits. This, to me, is a case study of failed allyship. Right? If somebody asked me, give me a great example of failed allyship by the global North, I would hold these up as my marquee case studies, because this was a God-given opportunity to show up and be good human beings and allies, and global North governments completely failed us. So that's why I have even less hope that they will do the right thing, given what has been happening this week and will happen in the coming months. As depressing as that was, and I'm sorry, I do want to talk a little bit about some hopeful examples, because I myself am looking for hope, and I'm looking to document examples. We are working on an exemplar project precisely for that reason. So here are some hopeful examples, okay? And if you know more, I will add it to my slide deck for the coming talks, okay? Because otherwise this gets to be a very depressing discussion. So one is, partly because of all the noise we made, International AIDS Society, I don't know if anyone here is a part of IAS, they decided that they're going to rotate the conference 1 year in the global North, 1 year in the global South. To me, this would be the rock bottom minimum that every global health conference or meeting should essentially aspire to. At a minimum, you will not organize every darn meeting in the global North, where you're not even going to get a quarter of the global South people that you want a platform. That rotating between the North and South would be like a bare minimum, right? In an ideal world, I would argue, for diseases like tropical medicine or TB or malaria, you should pretty much do all your meetings in the global South. Failing that, this would be, to me, my rock bottom, right? So I was happy to see that. I think we've convinced our TB conference organizer along the same lines. So we're hoping this might be a path forward for us. Global health journals, I can speak to this a little bit more confidently, because I was asked to co-create a global health journal. And it's always nice when you can build something new, and you don't have a 200-year-old legacy weighing you down, that there's only one right way to do it. So when we were asked to create this journal, PLOS Global Public Health, and there are several of you who are on my editorial board, we basically started off by saying, could we build a journal where there will be 2 editors-in-chief, one from the North, one from the South, a male and a female? Could we have 50% of the editorial board from the North, from the South, 50% men, women? And could we build a journal where nobody's going to be turned away because they can't pay $2,000 as an article processing charge? So we listed these, what looked like crazy ideas. And to our shock, the publisher says, yeah, run with it, right? So that's how we created the journal. So Catherine Kyogutunji, that many of you know, Kenya, lives in Kenya, she and I are editors-in-chief. We started off by explicitly saying, we are very aware of how messed up global health is, and we're intentionally trying to overcorrect for it, right? So you put out the statement, and then we go back and look at it as to what we have done or not achieved. And we were ranked as the most diverse global health journal, not by us, by somebody else, right? And this, to me, showed me that it's not just the editorial board diversity that matters. What about authorship, right? Intentionally, we go and commission, I'm looking at Ibrahim, I'm looking at many of you in the room. We have come to you, asking you to contribute. because we know, guess who all the pitches come from on a daily basis? Who's pitching us every day? Global North. Again, mostly men. For a while, we had opened the editorial board. Anybody could nominate themselves to be on our board. Guess who nominated themselves? Global North men. It's like a clockwork. I told you, it's like there's like this great attractor. It's like a magnetic North Pole, right? Everything in global health floats in that direction unless you stop and say no. So we immediately said, shut down that portal. We're going to go and seek editors. We're going to go seek authors. At every stage of the way, this required, so this is 3 years worth of daily intentionality. And even when you stop for 1 day, 1 week, it just starts swinging and it starts becoming more and more Lancet-like, right? So my point is that, yes, I can tell you from experience, you can build a different global health journal, one that is genuinely trying to be safe for global south authors, for communities, people of color. But this does not happen without extraordinary intent and daily hard work. I think that would be true for DEI. You don't do DEI for 1 week and then stop, right? That would be true for anti-racism. You're not anti-racist for 1 day. You have to do it for life. I think it's a lifelong practice that makes a journal finally what it is. So I can't tell you what the journal will look like 10 years from now because I'm not going to be around or my fellow editors are not going to be around. You got to bring that ethos on a daily basis. So for example, we have a whole piece on authorship. So when we see a classic parachute science paper, we can reject the paper. We often send it back saying, we don't understand this authorship, right? The whole piece is about Uganda. Why is there not a single Ugandan author, right? We are trying to bring that. We're asking them to publish a reflexivity statement. So there's a lot of us who are thinking about how to redress this massive authorship inequity that we see. And it's not just that, it's partnerships, right? If you ask me, so for every McGill student who goes to a low and middle income country, how many students come to McGill? I'm scared to give you that number because it's not looking good. And I think that would be the same for the London schools and the Harvards and the Oxfords. Our partnerships are primarily unidirectional. We benefit the most from partnerships, not our so-called Global South partners. So there are checklists. Could we be better partners? Could we be genuinely reciprocal and bidirectional? There's equity checklists of all sorts published now. And I was happy and delighted to see this new book, which I would recommend this for all of you. I was asked to write a prologue to this book. The entire book is about partnerships in global health. And guess what? There are really thoughtful people out there who try to build very equitable partnerships. So I'm seeing some hope in these sorts of examples. And I would love to hear from you. Give me one international partnership that is genuinely bidirectional, genuinely equitable, right? Where the authorship is shared, where the decision-making is shared, where the funding flows are in both directions, or the flow of expertise is in both directions. Right now, I would say vast majority of partnerships in global health primarily benefit global North partners, not the global South partners. And lastly, funders. Oh boy. Now you and I know that we all dance to the tune of who's paying the check, right? So we've written and others have written what allyship from funders could look like, right? Fundamentally, when funders say, this is a malaria project, we will be only funding African malaria institutions. That was a seismic shift. I know Ngozi was involved in advocating for it, and I know there was some positive outcome from that advocacy that was made. Why is malaria funding going to Switzerland or Canada or Seattle, right? Why is it not going to the most experienced people in malaria research who are on the African continent, right? Why is NTD funding not go to where it needs to be? I think funders are slowly starting. I do not want to tell you it's a slam dunk. It is not. More so now after this week. But you look at at least there was a commitment to localize, to regionalize, to move monies away to where it needs to be, whether it's Wellcome Trust or Fogarty, and pay a fair overhead to Global South organizations. It cannot be 56% for Stanford and 8% for Cambridge, right? That kind of crazy imbalance needs to end, because without overheads, you cannot build the infrastructure you need. You cannot have the accounting systems and the transparency and the number of paperwork that even needs to be completed for these grants. I don't know what this will look now with the USAID anymore. I cannot tell you what it's going to look for NIH anymore. I don't. None of us know, right? But this just goes to tell you that if funders do not shift how they think about global health, we will all be part of the system, because we are all trying to go after the same pots of money, and we will do whatever is necessary to acquire the money. And last slide would be to say, are there organizations that are thoughtfully decentering away from the global north, intentionally doing it with great clarity on what they're trying to accomplish? So this is an organization called IPAS. Those of you in reproductive health know about them. They're saying, okay, we're no longer going to control everything sitting in the United States. We're going to decenter to our country offices, not just in terms of power, in terms of resources and decision-making ability. Now, in your case at WHO, this is already in place. It's decentering to your country offices, right, which is already established in your structure, so that this building in Geneva isn't making all the decisions, right? And there are others, right? So, for example, this would be an HIV organization that intentionally moved their headquarters to an African center. That was a disability-based organization that intentionally moved away from London to Johannesburg. Each of these are examples of people saying, okay, we know that this is primarily a global South issue. We cannot be running it sitting in our rarefied offices in New York or Seattle or Geneva. We're going to move this to where it needs to move. So, am I naive in thinking that any of these power shifts can happen easily? We just discussed it. Certainly this week is proof that power will not shift. Power instead will try to exercise itself with devastating consequences for all of us. I mean, look at that. Again, this is not new. I wrote this a few months ago. And if you ask me, what is the number one obstacle for shifting power in global health? I have no doubts in saying to you, it is our global north governments. Global north governments are the number one reason for inequities in global health. Everything we did, vaccine hoarding, came from our leaders. Anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, visa policies. We cannot solve the visa policies as a global health community. It is not in our hands. If we had, we would have solved it. What is in our hands is to not host the meeting in Switzerland. That is in our hands, but not once you decide to host it in Geneva, then you are at the mercy of the Swiss government. And I'm telling you, from everything we are seeing, erosion of democracy, which is happening thick and fast, right? According to the last report, only 8% of the world's population lives in true democracies. And this is, I think, shifted even more so now when Canada also moves in that direction. We are in a losing battle against these forces. So how do we resist our own government's policies? Needs to be on the table for all global north folks. What are we doing? What am I doing to hold the Canadian government accountable, right? I advocated with the Canadian government for us to share vaccines. I even spoke in the Canadian Parliament. Nothing happened, but I tried, right? Just like the US folks now in global health will have to fight a battle with the Trump administration. Every one of us needs to show up, because we need to convince these leaders that what they're doing is antithetical to equity. Global North donors, I am deeply concerned. We are in an era of broligarchy, right? This is broligarchy number one, and I am not seeing any kind of reflexivity among the super wealthy on how this is going to go. If anything, they've demonstrated that they are firmly aligned with the forces that move away from equity, right? Last week's inauguration, or this week's inauguration, is the clearest indication of what we can say about how wealthy people and philanthrocapitalism will work. Global North universities, that I can speak about, right? There are universities which are now saying, okay, we need to change our promotion criteria. If we demand first authorship, if we demand that all the money needs to come to us, then our global north academics will do what they need to do to survive, right? If most of our global north academics are on soft money, going from grant to grant, then they will only do that. They will not care about equity, right? Many global north folks are on very precarious salaries, right? You don't get a grant, you're gone the next year, right? All of this makes for global north universities to be hungry, to be heavily reliant on soft money and overheads that come with soft money, and they will push global north academics like me to do things that are inherently non-equitable, right? Changing this is massive work. I'm just starting to see Global North University revise their promotion criteria to say, we understand that you don't need to be a first author. We still believe that you made a difference. We understand that you don't need to be a PI on every grant, but that you can work with Global South partners and still be collaborative, right? That is the kind of work we need to do. And the backlash against DEI is just gone bonkers, right? I don't know what to say to you. I mean, I saw something that you could even be penalized for even thinking about DEI policies in today's day and age. So maybe George Floyd wasn't murdered. I know, we've all forgotten, right? Everything we said and did after his murder is gone. And I know Ngozi is looking worried because she's working on the Lancet Commission. And we already discussed it a year ago, Ngozi, as to what environment are we going to release this commission in. And I'd like for you to speak about it during Q&A. No, we can't allow that. And just to say that I love this piece. Every time I've given a talk like this in a global South setting, I was in South Africa not too long ago, and you know what they said? Oh, even within South Africa, we have a global North and a global South, right? When I do this in India, they say, yes, we have a global North and a global South even within India. Undoubtedly, this is true. Even within countries, it's the elites. In India, it would be the higher caste, quote unquote, right? Everywhere you see, there's massive disparity. So one would say, within a given country, there is work for allyship, right? The privileged and the elite within India will need to be allies to people who are not at the table. The white folks in South Africa will need to be allies to the black and brown folks. So this keeps going on and on. So I don't want us to only think about the North-South divide. I agree, North-South is massive, right? But I'm not naive to think that within countries somehow the problem is solved only by addressing the North-South power dynamic. There are deeply entrenched power dynamics within countries that are also worthy of addressing. That's why I think this paper is. And I think we all know by now, certainly after seeing what we saw this week, that I have very few hopes that somehow global North universities or funders or governments will suddenly wake up one morning and say, oh my God, we need to shift power, right? It ain't happening. It will not happen. It can only go in the other direction. Accumulating and hoarding power is the philosophy that they believe in their heart. And so I think the real discussion should be, how do you counter this, right? So things like greater South-South collaboration as a way to deal with this North hegemony is clearly one answer. Or a greater union within Africa to even push back against these policies and is another. Like you look at the inspiring work done by global South countries on climate change. They demanded the loss and damage fund. They demanded reparations, right? Something of that nature needs to happen because as things stand, I absolutely see no hope for global North institutions of any kind, especially the governments, to do anything different from what they have been doing for centuries. And so power will continue to be imbalanced. We will still be having this discussion 10 years from now because nothing would have fundamentally changed. Thank you very much.